Every mobile suit in Gundam exists because of an arms race. One faction builds something terrifying, the other scrambles to answer it, and the cycle repeats until both sides are fielding machines that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Today, I'm breaking down every iconic suit from the original series and what made each one dangerous, starting with the grunt that kicked it all off, MS-06 Zaku 2. The Zaku 2 is the most important mobile suit ever built, and it's not even the best one on this list. That's the whole point. This thing started rolling off production lines around UC0077, and by the time the one-year war kicked off, Zeon had been quietly stockpiling them across their fleets. 17.5 meters tall, 1,360 kilowatts of output, super hard steel alloy armor, a 120mm machine gun, and a heat hawk for when things got personal. 0 beam weapons, not a single one. And here's the thing, it didn't matter. The Zaku 2 showed up in over 35 episodes as Zeon's backbone. Every time the Federation looked out a window, there were more Zakus. Mass production alone created enough pressure to drag an entire military superpower into an arms race it wasn't ready for, eventually forcing them to build the GM, which we'll get to. Now, the real question the Zaku raises isn't about the suit. It's about the pilot. Char Aznable took a commander-type variant with boosted thruster output and made it look like an entirely different class of weapon. Same basic platform, better tuning, and a pilot who could actually use every bit of it, which means either Zeon got out-engineered or they lost to a superior pilot and blamed the hardware. The evidence points heavily toward the second one. The Zaku 2 was never the problem. It was the baseline. But if the Zaku was the question, the Federation's answer was about to arrive in the most underwhelming way possible. RGM-79GM. The GM is technically better than the Zaku in almost every measurable way. Higher power output, beam rifle capability, modular weapon loadouts. On paper, it wins. And that's the most depressing sentence in the entire one-year war. Here's the thing. The Federation looked at the RX-78-2 Gundam, reverse-engineered its core technology, and figured out how to mass-produce beam rifle capability for the common soldier. Thousands of units rolled off the assembly line. Thousands. The Zaku had a head start, but the Federation's industrial machine was built to bury that advantage under sheer volume. But the numbers don't tell the whole story. The GM arrived later than it should have. The Federation had the engineering, the factories, the budget, and they still spent months fumbling through development while pilots were dying in tanks and fighter jets against mobile suits. Bureaucracy moved slower than bullets, which is, you know, not ideal. What makes it frustrating is the flexibility. Commanders could outfit GMs with Gatling guns, 100mm machine guns, or beam rifles depending on the mission. The Zaku never had that kind of tactical adaptability. The GM was the superior platform in every way that should have mattered, and yet it never became the war winner it was designed to be. The Federation eventually overwhelmed Zeon through production capacity, but individual GMs were still getting chewed up by veteran Zaku pilots with years of combat experience. Thousands of units, and a horrifying number of them, became coffins for green pilots with zero business being in a cockpit. The GM didn't prove the Federation could build better machines. It proved that having the best technology means nothing if your pilots can't match the people they're fighting. But if the GM represents the tragedy of quantity over quality, the next entry never should have existed at all. RX-75-4 gun tank. Let's address the elephant in the room. The gun tank is barely a mobile suit. It's a tank. It has caterpillar treads instead of legs, and it looks like someone welded arms onto a piece of artillery and called it a day. The community has been arguing about this thing's classification for decades, and honestly, both sides have a point. But here's the thing, the Federation didn't need another nimble humanoid frame. They needed something that could park itself 2 kilometers away and turn a Zeon outpost into a crater. And that's exactly what the gun tank does. With twin 120mm cannons mounted on the shoulders and arm-mounted 4-tube missile launchers, this thing was designed as a long-range siege platform. You don't move it. You point it at a building, and then that building stops being a building. It's the military equivalent of I'm not chasing you, I'm just going to destroy everything in your general direction. What makes the gun tank genuinely interesting though is its pilot. Hayato Kobayashi starts the series as the guy nobody's paying attention to. He's not Amuro, he's not even Kai. He's the short, overlooked kid who gets stuck inside the least glamorous machine the Federation had to offer. But across the one-year war, strapped into what most people wouldn't even call a mobile suit, Hayato quietly becomes one of the most dependable operators on the white base. No new type awakening, no dramatic power-up, just a stubborn kid refusing to be irrelevant inside a glorified artillery piece. It's one of the most underrated character arcs in the entire series, and it happened inside a machine most fans won't even call a mobile suit. But if the gun tank represents the Federation's brute force philosophy, the next entry proves they could actually build something with a little more finesse. RX-77-2 Gun Cannon. Let's talk about the most disrespected mobile suit in the entire one-year war. The gun cannon was developed alongside the Gundam itself as part of the Federation's prototype trifecta, standing 18.3 meters tall with a 1,440 kilowatt power output. It was built for one job, mid-range fire support, and it did that job better than anything else on the battlefield. Dual 240mm shoulder-mounted cannons gave it the ability to obliterate targets from range while staying outside melee distance, which, you know, is where people tend to die. Kai Shiden piloted this thing throughout the series, and nobody talks about it because he wasn't swinging a beam saber around looking cool. He was doing the actual work, deleting Zaku's from a comfortable distance while Amuro got all the credit. Kai started as a reluctant, sarcastic guy who wanted zero part of the war, and somehow became one of the most reliable combat presences on White Base. Here's where it gets interesting though. The gun cannon also carried a beam rifle as part of its standard loadout, so you've got a suit that can lay down heavy artillery bombardment and pick off targets with precision beam weaponry. That combination was genuinely terrifying. It filled a role that no other Federation suit could touch, covering Amuro's flanks while keeping entire Zeon squads pinned down. It just didn't look as dramatic doing it, and Kai's arc matters here. He went from reluctant and self-serving to a genuinely committed fighter, and he did it in a support suit. That trajectory essentially helped define the support ace archetype that Gundam would lean on for decades afterward. Every competent wingman in the franchise owes something to this guy and his two shoulder cannons. But if you think conventional artillery is the weirdest thing the one-year war produced, wait until you see what Zeon built for fighting underwater. MS-M04 ACGUI. This thing has no business being as fascinating as it is. 3 episodes, 3 units, and somehow decades later, fans are still arguing about what the Act Guy could have been if Zeon had actually committed to it. Here's what we know. The Act Guy was Zeon's purpose-built aquatic mobile suit, standing 18.2 meters tall with a 1,190 kilowatt power output, and instead of hands that hold weapons like a normal machine, it just had claws. Big, weird, specialized claws designed for underwater combat. No beam rifle, no machine gun, just claws and a dream. It showed up during episodes 18 through 20, deployed in Federation water base assaults during the Pacific Campaign. Exactly 3 confirmed operational units. That's it. 3 aquatic murder crabs, and then they were gone forever. But here's where it gets interesting. The Act Guy's armor was deliberately optimized for water resistance and pressure tolerance, which meant Zeon intentionally sacrificed firepower to make it survive underwater. That's not a design flaw, that's a philosophy. And it's the wrong one, because while Zeon kept building the perfect tool for one specific job, the Federation was building tools that worked everywhere. The Act Guy could dominate in water, cool. The war moved to land, then to space, and suddenly your hyper-specialized underwater claw machine is about as useful as a submarine in a desert. This is the Act Guy's real legacy, not what it did, but what it represents. Zeon's entire military strategy was built on having the right suit for the right terrain, which sounds smart until you realize wars don't stay in one place. The Federation figured that out. Zeon never did. But if you think the Act Guy represents a questionable design choice, wait until you meet the suit that replaced the Zaku 2 and bet everything on a sword. MS-07B Gauf. Every mobile suit we've covered so far brought a gun to the fight. The Goof brought a sword, and that wasn't a limitation. That was the entire point. Zeon looked at the Zaku 2, looked at the Federation's growing technological edge, and decided the answer wasn't a bigger gun. It was getting close enough that guns don't matter. The Goof pushed 1,500 kilowatts of output, a meaningful jump over the Zaku 2, and Zeon poured all of that extra power into mobility and a heat saber that could cut through Federation armor like wet cardboard. 0 beam rifle capability. Not because they couldn't figure it out, but because they didn't want one, which is, you know, a choice. About 800 units rolled off the line, handed exclusively to pilots who actually knew what they were doing. This wasn't a grunt suit, this was a statement. And nobody made that statement louder than Ramba Ral. Here's the thing about Ral's confrontations with Amuro across episodes 18 through 22. Up until this point, Amuro had been winning fights mostly because the Gundam was just better than everything it faced. Superior specs, superior firepower, firepower, done. But Rao closed the distance, negated the beam rifle advantage, and suddenly Amuro was in a knife fight with a guy who'd been in knife fights his entire career. The Gundam spec sheet meant nothing at close range against a pilot with decades of combat instinct. This forced Amuro to actually become a pilot, not just a kid in an overpowered machine, but someone who understood his suit and fought with genuine synchronization. That's the narrative turning point of the entire series, and it happened because one Zeon commander decided a sword was enough. Now, whether building 800 melee-focused suits was brilliant adaptation or spectacular misallocation is a conversation Zeon never got to finish, because while they were perfecting the sword fight, someone else was building something that made the whole debate irrelevant. MS-09 Dom. The Dom is the suit that makes you want to grab Zeon's entire command structure by the shoulders and shake them. Because this thing was genuinely incredible, and they completely wasted it. Here's what made the Dom different from everything that came before it. Every mobile suit up to this point walked, legs on the ground, stomping around like giant armored toddlers. The Dom said forget all of that and introduced a hover propulsion system that let it glide across terrain at speeds exceeding 230 kilometers per hour. That's not a minor upgrade, that's a fundamentally different approach to how a mobile suit moves through a battlefield. Standing 18.7 meters tall with 1,520 kilowatt output, the Dom packed a beam rifle, a heat saber, and dual machine guns. Multi-role elite combat in a package that could outrun basically anything the Federation had on the ground. And here's the thing that makes the Dom genuinely fascinating from a strategic perspective. The hover system wasn't just about going fast, it was Zeon's engineering answer to the new type problem. You can't grow psychic pilots in a lab, but you can build a machine so fast that even a new type struggles to track it. Pure mechanical acceleration as a counter to raw psychic ability. No gifts required, but Zeon in their infinite wisdom only produced somewhere between 200 and 300 units. The manufacturing costs were astronomical, the complexity was brutal, and they restricted them exclusively to elite command staff. So instead of flooding the battlefield with hover-capable nightmares, they handed a few to their best guys and called it a day. The fanbase treats the Dom as the war's single biggest what if. Earlier mass production, proper pilot training programs, dedicated hover combat doctrine, any one of those changes and the entire conflict looks different. Instead, Zeon built the perfect tool and then locked it in a display case. But if you think a fast suit is impressive, wait until you see what one specific pilot did with a completely standard one. MS-06S Char's Zaku 2. Everything we've covered so far has been about machines. This one is about a myth. Char Aznable's custom-red Zaku 2 is technically the same suit we just talked about. Same 120mm machine gun, same heat hawk, same Zaku frame built on the same assembly line. And yet this thing shows up in episode 1 and immediately makes you forget every other mobile suit exists. The red paint job alone created an entire visual language for the franchise. One color, that's all it took to turn a mass production grunt into the most iconic mech in anime history. Now here's where it gets complicated. Everyone knows the claim, 3 times faster than a standard Zaku. It's been repeated so many times it might as well be scripture. But here's the thing, nobody can actually confirm whether that's mechanically true. The thruster output was tuned, sure. Char had the thing modified with enhanced propulsion, but the technical manuals and what you actually see on screen have been contradicting each other for over 45 years. Some sources say the suit was genuinely overhauled. Others suggest Char was simply that good, and the 3 times faster reputation came from terrified Federation pilots who couldn't process what they were seeing, and Tomino never clarified, deliberately. Was Char an elite pilot squeezing every drop of performance from a standard frame, or did he make modifications so extensive that nobody bothered to document them? The ambiguity is the point. What isn't ambiguous is the impact. Char piloted this suit for maybe 10 episodes out of 43, and in that short window, he made the Gundam look beatable. Not through superior technology, not through new type abilities, but through sheer piloting skill in what was essentially a painted Zaku. That single achievement forced the entire franchise to reckon with a question it still hasn't answered. Does the machine matter, or does the pilot? But Char wasn't done experimenting with custom suits. His next one traded land for water, and it might be even more controversial. MSM-07S Char's Zigok. This is the suit where Char stopped settling and started demanding. Every mobile suit before this, he took what Zeon gave him and made it work through sheer skill. The Zigok was different. This was Char getting his hands on a commander variant of an already terrifying amphibious suit and pushing it to its absolute limit, and it showed. Standing 17.4 meters tall with a 2,480 kilowatt output, the Zigok was an absolute firepower power leap over anything Zeon had put underwater before. Mega particle cannons built directly into the palms. Iron nail claws for when vaporizing something wasn't personal enough. For context, the Guy was out there poking Federation bases with glorified pincers. Char's Z-Gok could melt them from range. The raw generator output alone made previous amphibious suits look like bath toys, which is not a small gap when you're talking about experimental aquatic weaponry. But here's where it gets complicated. Char's specific unit only appeared in episodes 37 through 39, 3 episodes. That's the entire combat record of what was supposed to be Zeon's finest amphibious commander machine. The standard Z-Gok saw mass production and real deployment, dozens of them storming Jaburo alongside other aquatic suits. But Char's custom variant, 1 unit, 1 pilot. A brief, brilliant flash before the war swallowed everything whole. And that's exactly what makes it tragic. The Z-Gok program wasn't just a suit, it was a thesis statement. Zeon's vision of a military where amphibious mobile suits could match or exceed surface-based Federation firepower. No more treating the ocean as a secondary theater. Every approach vector a legitimate threat. The problem is that by the time this philosophy reached peak deployment, Zeon was already collapsing. The Z-Gok arrived brilliant and immediately overshadowed by the war's endgame, which is basically Zeon's entire late war strategy summarized in one machine. Stunning engineering, zero time left to capitalize on it. But if you think unrealized potential is sad, wait until you see what happened when Zeon tried the same desperate innovation with a sword. YMS 15 GYN. This is the saddest mobile suit on the entire list. The Gaian carries the YMS designation, which in Zeon's naming convention means one thing: experimental, non-production, never intended to see a factory line. And it didn't. 3 units, that's it. 3 units produced before the entire program was shut down because, well, the war was ending and there wasn't going to be anyone left to build a 4th. But here's what makes it tragic. The Gaian is genuinely impressive. 1,500 kilowatts output, an aerodynamic frame designed specifically for atmospheric operations, and a beam saber specialized for piercing that looked like Zeon's engineers sat down and said, what if we made something that could actually win? It was fast, it was elegant, and it showed up in episode 37, the duel in Texas. 1 episode, that's what this suit got. 1 episode, 3 units, and decades of fans staring at the ceiling wondering what could have been. The Gaian proves something nobody at Zeon wanted to hear. Their engineers never stopped being brilliant. Right up until the military collapsed around them, they were still producing genuine solutions to Federation superiority. But engineering a solution and deploying it at scale are 2 completely different problems, and Zeon only ever solved the first one. What's wild is that the Gaian's minimal screen time actually made it more famous, not less. It became the centerpiece of every what if Zeon deployed this earlier debate in the entire fandom. 1 episode of footage generated more speculation than suits, with 10 times the screen presence. Fans have spent 45 years mourning a mobile suit that barely existed, which is, you know, not ideal. But if the Gaian represents Zeon's final tragedy, the next entry represents the machine that caused it. The one suit that made every Zeon innovation feel like it was already too late. RX-78-2 Gundam. This is the one, the suit that started everything. The RX-78-2 Gundam was the Earth Federation's most expensive gamble in the entire 1-year war. A classified research prototype with a nuclear reactor core, new type responsive control systems, beam rifle and beam saber armaments, and a production cost exceeding 100 times that of a standard mobile suit. They built exactly 3 units. 3. Standing 18.0 meters tall with 1,380 kilowatts output. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a statement that the Federation was done playing defense. But here's what makes the Gundam more than just a really expensive robot. The machine was designed to grow with its pilot. Amuro Ray climbed into the cockpit as a teenager with 0 combat training, and the suit's new type responsive systems essentially learned alongside him. As his abilities awakened, the Gundam's performance scaled to match, not through upgrades or modifications, through the pilot himself becoming something more. The suit anticipated where Amuro was going before he got there, creating a feedback loop where boy and machine evolved together across all 43 episodes. That symbiotic relationship became the DNA of the entire Gundam franchise. Every protagonist and their signature mobile suit for the next 45 years years follows this exact template: the chosen pilot, the unique machine, the bond that transcends normal engineering. It all traces back to Amuro and the RX-78-2. Now, the community has basically zero debate about whether the Gundam belongs on any list. It's the least controversial pick in franchise history. The only real argument is whether the suit's borderline invincibility sometimes overshadows Amuro's actual tactical decisions, especially in those early episodes where he's stumbling through fights and winning anyway. Plot armor or new type destiny, depends on who you ask. Either way, the Gundam rewrote the rules of the 1 Year War. It stopped being about armies the moment Amuro launched, but the thing about rewriting rules is that someone always writes back. And Char's response was waiting in the final episodes. Incomplete, untested, and absolutely terrifying. MSN-02 Zeong. Everything in the 1 Year War was building to this. Every Zaku that got shredded, every Gouf that closed the distance, every Dom that tried to outrun a new type. All of it was Zeon asking the same question: how do you beat a pilot whose mind is the weapon? The Zeong was Char's answer. This thing was a monster, 21.3 meters tall, generating 2,280 kilowatts of power, nearly double the Gundam's output. It carried 2 wire-guided detachable arms, each housing 5-barrel megaparticle cannons, all operated through a Psychommu new type interface. Not joysticks, not targeting computers, Char's brain. The pilot's mind literally became the weapon system, controlling detached hands, raining death from across the battlefield with zero physical input. And here's the thing, it was unfinished, rushed into deployment during episode 42 with zero operational testing. Engineers basically handed Char the keys and said, good luck, it should work, which is, you know, not ideal when you're about to fight the most dangerous new type alive. It nearly won anyway. That's the entire point. It validated everything Char believed from the first episode. New type capability should define the machine, not the other way around. An incomplete, untested prototype temporarily outperformed the most refined mobile suit the Federation ever built, because the philosophy behind it was correct. The fandom has never agreed on what the Zeong represents. Some call it the most visionary weapon ever designed. Others dismiss it as a narrative device built for dramatic purposes rather than engineering credibility. Both sides have a point, but that debate is exactly why the Zeong matters. It's the argument the entire 1 Year War was having with itself. Destiny versus will, completion versus innovation. Char strapped himself into something half-finished and fought God's chosen pilot to a standstill because he believed the idea was enough. Sometimes the idea is enough. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.